The gunshot that killed Katherine Holloway's husband still echoed in her nightmares 3 months later, but the sound of her children's hungry cries forced her awake every morning in their cramped Winnemucca boarding house room. She opened her eyes to the dusty Nevada dawn of August 1878, feeling the weight of 6-year-old Emma pressed against her left side and 4-year-old Thomas curled into her right, their small bodies seeking comfort even in sleep. The $10 she had left would barely cover another week of rent, and the general store owner had already denied her credit twice. Katherine rose carefully, extracting herself from between her children without waking them. She splashed cold water on her face from the chipped basin and studied her reflection in the small mirror. At 24 years old, she looked older, the worry lines around her green eyes deeper than they should be. Her auburn hair hung limply down her back, and her dress was fraying at the cuffs. James had been killed during a claim dispute at the silver mine where he worked, shot down by a man who disappeared into the mountains before the marshal could even begin an investigation. The mining company offered no compensation, claiming James was at fault for the altercation. She pulled on her most respectable dress and pinned her hair into a tight bun. Today she would try again to find work, any work that would keep her children fed. Emma stirred as Katherine buttoned her boots. "Mama, where are you going?" Emma's voice was small and frightened. The girl had barely spoken in the weeks immediately after her father's death, clinging to Katherine's skirts and crying at every shadow. "Just to find us some breakfast, sweetheart. You watch Thomas for me. I will be back soon, I promise." Katherine kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting the salt of old tears on the girl's skin. "I promise you both we are going to be all right. Mama will take care of everything." It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter what it cost her. The streets of Winnemucca were already bustling with miners, cowboys, and freighters heading to and from the Humboldt River crossing. Katherine walked with her head high, despite the empty feeling in her stomach. She had already tried the hotel, the restaurants, and the laundry. Today she would approach the saloons, though the thought made her chest tight with anxiety. Respectable women did not work in such establishments, but respectability would not feed her children. The Silver Strike Saloon sat at the corner of Bridge Street and 4th, its painted sign freshly touched up. Katherine stood outside for a full minute, gathering her courage, before pushing through the doors. The smell of stale beer and tobacco smoke hit her immediately. A man was sweeping the floor and another was restocking bottles behind the bar. She recognized the owner, a heavyset man named Garrett who had been friendly with James, Mrs. Holloway. Garrett looked surprised to see her. "What brings you here?" "I need work, Mr. Garrett." "Anything you might have. Cleaning, cooking, washing dishes. I am a hard worker and I am desperate." The words burned her throat, but she forced them out. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Garrett's face softened with sympathy, but he shook his head. "I am sorry, Katherine. I already have more help than I need, and business has been slow with the mine cutting back operations. I wish I could help you." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thank you anyway." Back on the street, Katherine blinked against the bright morning sun. She had 3 more saloons to try, then the boarding houses, then she did not know what. The desperation clawed at her chest, making it hard to breathe. She started walking toward the Golden Nugget when a commotion at the end of the street caught her attention. A group of men on horseback were riding hard into town, and even from a distance, she could see something was wrong. The lead rider was slumped forward in his saddle, and dark stains covered his shirt. The others were shouting for a doctor. Katherine pressed herself against the wall of the mercantile as they thundered past, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. "Outlaws hit the relay station at Golconda," someone near her said. killed the station master and took everything of value. These boys tried to stop them and got shot up for their trouble. Katherine watched as the wounded man was helped down from his horse. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His face was pale with blood loss, but his jaw was set with determination. As the others supported him, his eyes met Katherine's for just a moment, and she saw the same thing she felt every morning looking at her children, the fierce will to survive. Then they were past her, heading for the doctor's office, and Katherine returned to her grim task of searching for work. By noon, she had been turned away from every establishment in town. Her feet ached, her head pounded from hunger, and the $10 in her pocket felt like a death sentence. How did one choose between rent and food, between shelter and survival? She returned to the boarding house to find Emma and Thomas exactly where she had left them, still in their night clothes, their faces drawn with hunger. Katherine's heart shattered and reformed in the same instant, hardening into something sharp and unbreakable. She took the coins from her pocket and counted out enough for bread, cheese, and milk. "Get dressed, my darlings. We are going to have a proper lunch, and then Mama needs to think." She fed her children, watching them devour the simple meal with an intensity that made her want to weep. When they were finished, Emma looked up at her with those serious green eyes so like her own. "Mama, are we going to be all right?" Katherine knelt down and took both children's hands in hers. "Yes, baby, I made you a promise and I keep my promises. We are going to be all right. I will fight as hard as I need to, and I will keep us safe and fed. Do you believe me?" Emma nodded slowly, and Thomas threw his small arms around Katherine's neck. She held him tight, breathing in the little boy scent of him, and felt the steel in her spine strengthen. She would not let her children down. She would not let them go hungry or homeless. Whatever it took, she would find a way. That afternoon, Katherine made a decision. She would go to the cattle ranches outside of town. Perhaps they needed help in the kitchens or with laundry. It would mean walking several miles with the children, but she had no other options left. She dressed Emma and Thomas in their best clothes, packed what little food remained, and they set out on the dusty road leading east from Winnemucca. The sun beat down mercilessly as they walked. Thomas complained after the first mile, and by the second, Katherine was carrying him on her hip while Emma trudged beside them. The weight made Katherine's back ache, but she did not stop. The first ranch they came to, the foreman barely let her finish speaking before sending her away. "No work for women and definitely no place for children," he said gruffly. "Try the Thompson place, another 3 miles east. They are a bigger operation. 3 more miles." Katherine adjusted Thomas on her hip and took Emma's hand. They walked on. The Thompson Ranch sprawled across the valley, with a large main house, several bunkhouses, and extensive corrals. Katherine could see dozens of cattle grazing in the distance, and several cowboys working with horses in a nearby pen. Her feet were bleeding inside her boots by the time they reached the main house, but she climbed the porch steps with her head high and knocked firmly on the door. A Mexican woman in her 50s answered, her face kind but cautious. "Yes, please, madam. I am looking for work. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, anything at all. I have 2 children and we are in desperate need. I am a hard worker, I promise you. I will do whatever is necessary." The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in Katherine's worn dress, the exhausted children, the desperation in her eyes. "Wait here." She disappeared into the house, leaving Katherine standing on the porch with her heart pounding. Thomas had fallen asleep against her shoulder and Emma leaned heavily against her skirts. "Please," Katherine prayed to whatever God might be listening, "please let this work." The woman returned with an older man, silver-haired and weathered, wearing expensive boots and a stern expression. I am Robert Thompson. Consuela says you are looking for work. Yes, sir. I am Katherine Holloway. My husband was killed 3 months ago at the mine in town, and I have these 2 children to support. I can cook, clean, sew, and work as hard as any man. I just need a chance to prove myself. Thompson's expression softened slightly as he looked at the children. The mine. You are James Holloway's widow. Yes, sir. Did you know my husband? I knew of him. Good man from what I heard. Bad business. What happened? He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. I do not usually hire women for ranch work, Mrs. Holloway, but I lost my cook last week and the men are complaining about the food. Can you cook for 30 men 3 times a day? Catherine's heart leaped. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Room and board for you and the children, plus $20 a month. You would live in the small cabin behind the main house. Meals are at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 at night. The men work hard and they expect hot, filling food. Can you manage that? Yes, sir. When can I start? Tomorrow morning. Consuela will show you the cabin and the kitchen. Get yourselves settled today. Katherine felt tears of relief burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You will not regret this. I promise you. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and sturdy. It had a real bed, a stove, a table with chairs, and best of all, it was theirs. Consuela showed Katherine the ranch kitchen, a large building separate from the main house, equipped with a massive cast iron stove, long preparation tables, and shelves stocked with supplies. You cook here, Consuela explained. The men eat in the dining hall next door. Breakfast is simple, usually biscuits, bacon, eggs, beans. Lunch is sandwiches, stew, whatever is quick. Dinner needs to be substantial, meat and potatoes, bread, vegetables. I will help you the first few days until you understand the routine. Katherine nodded, taking mental notes of everything. She could do this. She had cooked for her own family, and while 30 men was daunting, it was not impossible. It was survival, and survival was something she understood. That first night in the cabin, Katherine tucked Emma and Thomas into the bed they would all share and sat at the table with a cup of tea Consuela had given her. For the first time in 3 months, the knot of panic in her chest loosened slightly. They had shelter. They had food. She had work. It was not much, but it was a start. She had kept her promise to her children, at least for now. The fight was far from over, but they had survived another day. She woke before dawn the next morning, her body protesting every movement after yesterday's long walk. She dressed in the dark and crept to the kitchen, where Consuela was already starting a fire in the massive stove. You are early. Good. Consuela handed her an apron. We start with biscuits. You know how to make biscuits for 30 men. Katherine tied the apron around her waist. Show me once, and I will remember. The work was back-breaking, mixing enormous batches of biscuit dough, frying pounds of bacon, scrambling dozens of eggs. The heat from the stove made sweat pour down Katherine's back, and her arms ached from kneading and stirring. But when the cowboys filed into the dining hall at 6, the food was hot and plentiful, and Katherine felt a surge of pride. She was cleaning up from breakfast, planning the noon meal in her head, when the door to the kitchen opened and several men entered carrying someone between them. Katherine recognized one of them as Ben Thompson, Robert's son and the ranch foreman. We need hot water and clean cloths, Ben said urgently. This man was injured badly a few days ago and his wounds have gotten worse. The doctor in town did what he could, but said he needed rest and care. My father offered him a place to recover here. They laid the man on one of the long preparation tables, and Katherine's breath caught. It was the cowboy from town, the one she had seen being helped from his horse after the outlaw attack. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and dark stubble covering his cheeks. His face was flushed with fever and his breathing was labored. "I will get water," Katherine said, pushing aside her surprise. She heated water on the stove and brought it with clean cloths. Ben carefully pulled back the man's shirt, revealing bandages soaked through with blood and pus. The wounds were infected. "We need to change these dressings and get the fever down," Ben said, his face grim. "Can you help, Mrs. Holloway? Consuela is needed in the main house, and we are short-handed with the men out on the range." Katherine hesitated only a moment. She had tended James when he was ill, and she had nursed both children through various sicknesses. This was worse, much worse, but the alternative was watching this man die. "Yes, I can help. What do you need me to do?" Ben showed her how to clean the wounds, how to apply the poultice the doctor had sent, how to wrap fresh bandages. The injured man groaned and muttered in his delirium, but did not wake. When they finished, Ben and the other cowboys carried him to the bunkhouse. "Keep an eye on him when you can," Ben asked Katherine. "Change the dressings twice a day and try to get him to drink if he wakes. We owe him. He is the one who rode to warn us about those outlaws heading this direction. Took a bullet doing it." Katherine nodded, adding this new responsibility to her already overwhelming list. She returned to the kitchen and threw herself into preparing the midday meal, trying not to think about the feverish man lying in the bunkhouse. For the next 3 days, Katherine's life became a blur of cooking, cleaning, and tending to the injured cowboy. She learned his name was Blake Harrison, and that he was a ranch hand who had been traveling to Thompson Ranch for work when he encountered the aftermath of the outlaw attack. She changed his bandages in the early morning before breakfast and again in the evening after dinner, always with Ben or another cowboy present for propriety's sake. On the 4th day, as she was cleaning his wounds in the early morning light, Blake's eyes opened. They were blue, she noticed, a deep blue like the Nevada sky at twilight. He stared at her for a long moment, confusion clouding his feverish gaze. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Thompson Ranch, outside Winnemucca. You were injured and you have been very sick. Try to drink this." She held a cup of water to his lips, supporting his head with her other hand. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. "The station master," he asked when he finished. "Dead, I am sorry, but you warned the Thompson Ranch and they were prepared. The outlaws moved on without attacking here. You saved lives." Blake closed his eyes and Katherine thought he had drifted back into unconsciousness, but then he spoke again. "Who are you?" "Katherine Holloway. I am the cook here. I have been helping tend your wounds." "Thank you." He opened his eyes again, studying her face. "You look tired." Katherine felt a surprised laugh escape her. "So do you." A faint smile crossed his lips before the fever claimed him again, but it was progress. Over the next week, Blake improved steadily. The fever broke. The wounds began to heal, and he started staying awake for longer periods. Katherine found herself looking forward to the times she changed his bandages, when they would talk quietly while she worked. She learned that Blake was from Colorado originally, that he had been working ranches since he was 16, that he had no family left. He learned that she was a widow, that she had 2 young children, that she was fighting with everything she had to build a life for them. They never touched beyond what was necessary for his care, but Katherine felt something shifting inside her, some long frozen part of her heart beginning to thaw. By the 2nd week, Blake was able to sit up and eventually to walk with assistance. The cowboys moved him to a bed in the corner of the bunkhouse, where he could rest more comfortably. Katherine still brought him his meals and checked his wounds daily, and their conversations grew longer and more personal. "Tell me about your children," Blake said one evening as Katherine unwrapped his bandages. The wounds were healing well now, scabbing over with healthy tissue beneath. Emma is 6, smart as a whip and serious beyond her years. The loss of her father affected her deeply. And Thomas is 4, full of energy and questions. He does not fully understand what happened, which is perhaps a blessing. Katherine's hands were gentle as she cleaned the healing wounds. "They are my whole world, Mr. Harrison. Everything I do is for them. Blake, please call me Blake." He watched her work, his eyes thoughtful. "They are lucky to have a mother who fights so hard for them. I made them a promise the morning after James died. I told them we would be all right, that I would take care of everything. A mother's promise to her children is sacred. I will keep fighting as long as I have breath in my body." She applied fresh bandages with practiced efficiency. "There, all done. These should be ready to come off for good in another few days. Thanks to you." Blake caught her hand as she reached for the old bandages, his grip gentle but deliberate. Katherine froze, her heart suddenly pounding. "I mean it, Katherine. You have taken care of me when you already have more than enough on your shoulders. Why?" She looked at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers smaller and reddened from constant work in hot water. "Because you needed help, and I could provide it. The same reason Mr. Thompson gave me this job when I desperately needed it. We survive by helping each other, do we not? Some people do. Others only look out for themselves." He released her hand slowly, and Katherine felt the loss of warmth immediately. "You are a remarkable woman, Katherine Holloway." She gathered the soiled bandages, her cheeks flushed. "I am just a mother doing what needs to be done. Nothing remarkable about that." But as she left the bunkhouse, she found herself smiling for the first time in months. Blake recovered quickly after that. Within a week, he was back on his feet, and Mr. Thompson officially hired him as a ranch hand. Katherine saw him around the ranch, working with the horses or mending fences, and they would wave or exchange brief greetings. She told herself the flutter in her stomach when she saw him was just friendship, just gratitude for the pleasant conversations they had shared. She had no room in her life for anything more complicated than survival. But Blake seemed to have other ideas. He started appearing at the kitchen at odd hours, offering to help carry heavy pots or bring in firewood for the stove. He played with Emma and Thomas when they came to watch their mother work, making them laugh with silly faces and stories about his adventures. He brought Katherine wildflowers he claimed to have found while riding fence lines, placing them in a jar on her cabin windowsill. "You do not need to do this," Katherine told him one afternoon as he helped her carry water from the well. "I am managing fine on my own." "I know you are. You could probably manage everything on this ranch single-handedly if you had to." Blake set down the buckets and turned to face her. "But the thing is, Katherine, you do not have to do it alone anymore. I want to help. I want to be here for you and those kids, if you will let me." Katherine's throat tightened. "Blake, I cannot. It is too soon after James, and I have too much to worry about already. I cannot add a relationship to everything else. I am not asking you to add anything. I am asking to share the load you are already carrying." He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Those children need someone fighting beside you, not just you fighting alone. And maybe, just maybe, you need that too." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you want to take on a widow with 2 children and nothing to her name?" Blake reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because from the moment I woke up and saw you taking care of me, saw the determination in your eyes, I knew you were someone special. Because I have watched you work yourself to exhaustion every single day to keep your promise to those kids. Because when Emma looks at you, I see the same fierce love my mother had before she died, and I remember what it means to have someone fight for you." His hand lingered near her cheek. "And maybe because I am falling in love with you, and I cannot seem to stop myself." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I am scared." "I know, so am I." Blake's smile was tender. "But we can be scared together. We can fight together, for their sake and for ours." She let herself lean into him then, just for a moment, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth. It felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. When she pulled back, she met his eyes directly. "I cannot promise you anything beyond today. I need to focus on my children, on keeping that promise I made them. But if you truly want to be part of this fight, if you want to stand beside me, then I will not push you away. That is all I am asking." Blake took her hand and squeezed it gently. "One day at a time, together." The next months passed in a blur of work and quiet moments of growing affection. Blake was true to his word, standing beside Katherine in every way that mattered. He helped Emma with her reading in the evenings, teaching her from the worn books he kept in his saddlebag. He taught Thomas to ride on a gentle mare, the boys' delighted laughter ringing across the ranch. He sat with Katherine after long days, talking about everything and nothing, making her laugh with his dry humor. And slowly, carefully, Katherine let herself love him. It was different from what she had felt for James. That had been young love, passionate and uncomplicated. This was deeper, forged in hardship and mutual respect. Blake had seen her at her lowest and chose to stay. He had watched her fight desperately for her children and admired her strength rather than finding it intimidating. He loved Emma and Thomas not because they were his, but because they were hers. Winter came to Nevada, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Catherine's cabin, which had seemed so wonderful in summer, proved drafty and hard to heat. She woke one December morning to find frost on the inside of the windows and both children shivering despite being piled under every blanket she owned. She got them dressed in layers and brought them to the kitchen, where at least the massive stove kept things warm. Blake found them there an hour later, Emma and Thomas sitting close to the stove while Katherine prepared breakfast. He took one look at the children's pinched faces and disappeared. He returned 20 minutes later with Ben Thompson. "Mrs. Holloway," Ben said formally, though his eyes were kind, "Blake tells me your cabin is not adequately heated. Is this true?" Katherine hesitated, unwilling to seem ungrateful. "It is colder than I expected, yes, but we are managing." "No, you are not," Blake said firmly. Thomas was coughing this morning and Emma's lips were blue. "They need better shelter." Ben nodded. "There is a larger cabin that opens up in spring for the seasonal workers. It has a proper fireplace and better insulation. It is yours if you want it. We will move you today." "But the rent," Katherine started, and Ben waved her off. "Same arrangement. Room and board plus your wages. My father would never forgive himself if something happened to these children because we provided inadequate housing." By that evening, Katherine and the children were settled in a cabin twice the size of their previous one, with a stone fireplace that Blake had already stocked with cut wood. There was a separate bedroom for the children, a small sitting area, and windows that actually sealed properly. Thomas ran from room to room in delight while Emma smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "This is too much," Katherine told Blake as he brought in the last of their few possessions. "It is exactly enough." Blake knelt in front of the fireplace, building up the fire until warmth flooded the room. "Your children deserve to be warm and safe. You deserve to not worry about them freezing while you work." Katherine sat down on the floor beside him, watching the flames dance. "You keep doing things like this, and I am going to have to admit that I love you." Blake turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Would that be so terrible?" "No." She reached out and took his hand. "It would not be terrible at all." In fact, I think it might be the best thing that has happened to me since all of this started." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Katherine met him halfway. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both children were staring at them from the doorway to their new bedroom, eyes wide. "Are you kissing Blake, Mama?" Thomas asked with a child's blunt curiosity. Katherine felt her face heat, but she did not let go of Blake's hand. "Yes, sweetheart." "Is that all right with you?" Emma spoke up, her voice serious. "Does this mean Blake is going to stay with us?" Blake looked at Katherine, waiting for her permission. She nodded slightly, and he turned to the children. "If you want me to, I would like that very much. I would like to be here for you and your mama to help take care of you all, but only if that is what you want to." Thomas ran over and threw himself at Blake, who caught him with a laugh. Emma approached more slowly, but when she reached them, she took Blake's free hand and squeezed it. "We want you to stay," she said simply. "Mama is happier when you are around, and you tell good stories." That night, after the children were asleep in their new room, Katherine and Blake sat by the fire talking in low voices. Blake told her about his dreams of one day having his own small ranch. Nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle and horses. Katherine told him about how she sometimes lay awake at night, still hearing that gunshot that killed James, still feeling the panic of those early days of widowhood. "I promised Emma and Thomas we would be all right," she said softly. "Some days I did not believe it myself. Some days I thought I was lying to them, making promises I could not keep. But I kept fighting anyway because what else could I do?" "You kept your promise," Blake said firmly. "You are all right. You are more than all right. You found work, you kept them fed and sheltered, and you never gave up. That is not a broken promise, Katherine. That is the strongest kind of love I have ever seen." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I could not have kept going without you. When you started helping, when you started standing beside me in this fight, it made everything more bearable." "For their sake," Blake murmured, stroking her hair. "I started doing it for their sake, because they needed someone besides their exhausted mother. But somewhere along the way it became for our sake, all four of us. I love you, Blake Harrison." Katherine lifted her head to look at him. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but you proved me wrong. I love you too, Katherine Holloway. And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving you were right to trust me with your heart." They sat together by the fire until the flames burned low, planning a future that had seemed impossible just months before. Spring came to Nevada with wildflowers blooming across the range and newborn calves staggering on unsteady legs. Katherine's position at the ranch was secure, the men praising her cooking and Mr. Thompson expressing satisfaction with her work. Blake had saved most of his wages over the winter, and he approached Katherine one warm April evening with a serious expression. "Marry me," he said without preamble. "I know it has only been a year since James died, and I know people might talk, but I do not care. I want us to be a real family. I want to adopt Emma and Thomas legally, give them my name, make sure they are protected, and I want you to be my wife." Katherine's eyes filled with happy tears. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Winnemucca. Emma and Thomas stood with them, dressed in new clothes Blake had insisted on buying. Consuela and Ben Thompson served as witnesses. Katherine wore a dress of soft blue cotton, nothing fancy, but Blake looked at her as though she were wearing silk and diamonds. "I promise to love you and your children as long as I live," Blake said during the vows, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to fight beside you, to share your burdens, and to never let you face hardship alone. I promise to trust you with my heart and my family," Katherine responded, her voice thick with emotion. I promise to build a life with you, to love you through whatever comes, and to never forget that you chose to stand beside me when I needed it most." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her thoroughly while Emma and Thomas cheered. They celebrated with a meal at the hotel restaurant, the children eating cake until they were sticky and giggling. That night, the four of them returned to their cabin as a real family. Blake was true to his word about adoption. He filed the necessary papers, and within 2 months, Emma and Thomas legally became Emma and Thomas Harrison. The children took to calling him Papa without any prompting, and Catherine's heart swelled every time she heard it. Blake was patient and kind with them, firm when necessary but never harsh. He taught Thomas to fish in the Humboldt River and helped Emma start a small garden outside their cabin. 2 years after their marriage, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Blake one evening after the children were asleep, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes widened, then filled with tears of joy. "A baby. We are having a baby." He placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Katherine, I never thought I would have this. A family, children of my own, a wife I love beyond reason." "It is a blessing," Katherine agreed, covering his hand with hers. "After everything we went through, all that fighting and struggling, we get this. We get happiness." The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, perhaps because she was not struggling to survive, not working herself to exhaustion while worried about where the next meal would come from. Blake and the other ranch hands took over any heavy work, and Consuela helped in the kitchen when Catherine's energy flagged. Emma and Thomas were excited about becoming older siblings, arguing good-naturedly about whether they would have a brother or sister. In February of 1881, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Blake Harrison, honoring both the man who had first given her children and the man who had saved them all. Blake held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Blake whispered. "Katherine, he is absolutely perfect. We made him out of love," Katherine said softly, exhausted but happy. "Out of the love that grew from fighting together, from keeping promises, from refusing to give up." Emma and Thomas were allowed in to meet their new brother, and they stared at the tiny baby with wonder. Thomas gently touched the baby's small hand, and little James immediately wrapped his fingers around Thomas's thumb. "He is strong," Thomas said with satisfaction. "Like Papa." "And like Mama," Emma added, looking at Katherine with admiration. "Mama is the strongest person I know." Over the next 2 years, their family flourished. Blake's dream of owning his own ranch moved closer to reality as he saved wages, and Mr. Thompson, impressed by Blake's work ethic and character, helped him negotiate the purchase of a small property bordering the Thompson Ranch. It was just 80 acres with a modest house, but it was theirs. They moved in spring of 1883, and Katherine cried as she walked through the house that would be their permanent home. It had 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. Blake immediately began making improvements, building furniture and repairing fences. Emma and Thomas, now 11 and 9, helped with the work. Little James, toddling around at 2 years old, mostly got in the way but made everyone laugh. Katherine continued cooking for Thompson Ranch, though now she worked as a contractor rather than an employee, bringing prepared meals several times a week. The income, combined with what Blake earned from raising and selling cattle, was enough to live comfortably. They were not rich, but they were secure. One evening in late summer, the whole family sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and gold. Emma was reading to Thomas from a book Blake had brought from town. James was asleep in Katherine's arms. Blake sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "You remember that morning in the boarding house?" Katherine asked softly. "When I made that promise to Emma and Thomas that we would be all right." "I do not remember it, but you have told me about it," Blake said. "Why?" "Because I think about it sometimes, about how desperate I was, how terrified. I made that promise not knowing if I could keep it, only knowing that I had to try, that I had to keep fighting, no matter how hard it got." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I kept that promise, Blake. We are all right. We are more than all right. We are happy." "You kept your promise by refusing to give up," Blake said, kissing her temple. "And I got to be part of that fight, got to stand beside you and help however I could, for their sake." He gestured to the children. "And for our sake." "For our sake," Katherine repeated, leaning into him. "I love you so much. I love you too. Forever." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace. The fight was not over. Life would always bring challenges, but she no longer faced them alone. She had Blake, she had her children, and she had the absolute certainty that they would face whatever came together. Emma looked up from her reading. "Mama, Papa, can we have a story?" "About when you first met," Blake laughed. "You have heard that story 100 times. But I like it," Thomas chimed in. "Tell the part about how Mama saved Papa's life." "I think it was the other way around," Katherine said with a smile. "No," Emma said seriously. "You saved each other. That is what makes it a good story." So Blake told the story once again, about the wounded cowboy and the desperate widow, about promises made and promises kept, about fighting for what mattered most. The children listened raptly, even though they knew every word. And little James woke up halfway through to babble along. When the story was finished, and the night had grown fully dark, they went inside together. Katherine tucked Emma and Thomas into their beds, kissing them good night. Blake put James down in his cradle, singing a soft lullaby. Then they met in their own bedroom, the room they shared as husband and wife. "You have any regrets?" Blake asked as they prepared for bed. Katherine considered the question seriously. "About James dying, about the struggle and fear." "Yes, I regret those things. I wish my children had not had to go through that trauma, wish I had not had to fight so hard just to survive." She crossed to him and took his hands. "But I do not regret where that path led me. I do not regret finding you, loving you, building this life with you." "So no, not really. No regrets." "Good." Blake pulled her close. "Because I plan to love you until my last breath, Katherine Harrison. You and those children are my whole world." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other in desperate circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Katherine thought again of that promise she had made to her children, the vow that had kept her fighting when everything seemed hopeless. She had kept that promise, and in doing so had found more than just survival. She had found love, partnership, and a future worth fighting for. 3 more children came in the following years, 2 daughters and another son, each one welcomed with joy. Emma grew into a confident young woman who became a teacher. Thomas followed in Blake's footsteps, becoming a skilled rancher. Young James proved to have his mother's determination and his father's kindness. The ranch prospered, growing slowly but steadily. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake gave Katherine a locket. Inside were tiny photographs of all 6 children, arranged in a circle. "Your promise kept," he said simply. Katherine wore that locket every day for the rest of her life, a reminder of the darkest time she had ever faced and the light that had come from it. She had fought hard to keep her promise to her children, and Blake had fought beside her for their sake. Together, they had built not just a life, but a legacy of love, determination, and the absolute certainty that when people stand together, they can overcome anything. Years later, When Emma asked her mother what advice she would give to her own children, Katherine thought for a long moment. Tell them that promises matter, especially the ones we make to the people who depend on us. Tell them that fighting for what matters is always worth it, even when the odds seem impossible. And tell them that sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find someone who will stand beside you in that fight, who will love you not despite your struggles, but because of the strength you show in facing them. Katherine smiled, thinking of Blake working in the barn, still strong and capable even as silver threaded through his dark hair. Tell them that love can grow even in the hardest soil, and when it does, it grows deep and unshakable. Emma wrote down her mother's words carefully, preserving them for future generations. And the story of Katherine and Blake, of promises kept and battles fought together, became part of the family history, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of determination, love, and standing together against whatever life brings. Katherine lived to see all her children grown and settled, to hold her grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. Blake was beside her through it all, true to his word about loving her until his last breath. They grew old together on their ranch in Nevada, surrounded by family, their love story a legacy that would outlive them both. And on quiet evenings, when Katherine sat on her porch watching the sun set over the land they had built together, she would touch the locket at her throat and remember that desperate morning when she had made a promise to two frightened children. She had kept that promise through sheer determination and love, and Blake had chosen to join her in that fight, making it his fight too. They had done it together, for the sake of the children and for the sake of each other, and in doing so had created something that would last for generations. A promise kept, a love forged in hardship, and a family that stood as proof that even in the darkest times, hope and love can prevail.